Hi everybody, Mr. Sapora here, marine biology class, and welcome to our weekly species list. Now, you may notice that I'm dressed like a unicorn today. It's because it's Mother's Day, and, well, I was requested to dress up like a unicorn today, and the kids are all in their different outfits as well. So anyway, it's just been one of those days. So I figured it'd be fun for you guys to have a unicorn present weekly species list, so I stayed in character just for you. Okay, so how this is going to work. Every week we're going to cover a new group of species, and you're going to have to learn the species, their common scientific names, and I'll go over that more, and then some facts about the group that they belong to, the phylum notes as we call it. So that's all one part of the species list. And there'll be a test on this here in a couple weeks over two of our lists, and then we'll go through two more, and there'll be another test on those. In covering the species list, what I'm going to have you guys do for this section, normally I would have a printout of this to give you. Since we don't have that, I will post this on Google Classroom, and you can fill in the information here, the common, the scientific name, and the description of each. And I'm going to want a drawing of each species as well. So if you don't have a printer and you can't print this, feel free just to recreate this sheet on a blank piece of paper, a piece of notebook paper, however you want to do it. Take a photo and then just post that into Google Classroom into the assignment for the week, and that we do on Friday. So all of our species on this list, put those all on one sheet of paper, just go across. Again, the common name, scientific name, description, and drawing. Handwrite those, and then just take a photo of that, and that way you can print this, and then do it that way as well. Also, the phylum notes on the back, just take some notes on the phylum information about the cover, take a photo of the notes, and then post that as well. So you're doing the work on this. Okay, so, and let's get into the species list. Okay. General overview, the way the weekly species list works, this will be kind of the lab part of your grade in this class. There's two parts to it. One is the phylum notes, and this is information on the larger classification group that these organisms belong to. So the first group we're going to do are marine algae or seaweeds. So I'm going to have some information about those as a whole. So that's what the phylum notes are going to cover. And you're going to have to learn some shared characteristics. In other words, what are some characteristics that belong to this entire group? And then maybe a super, there's also some cool facts I throw in there, some oh wow facts, something that stands out to you as being interesting or cool. And we'll do that each week with each group that we get into and go through. Next week will be, I believe, the cnidarians, which are like anemones, corals, jellyfish, all of those, and they all have some characteristics that they all share in common, and you're going to need to learn those. The second part will be the actual species, and we'll do 5 to 8 different species each week from the Eastern Pacific, which is our ocean here. Even though we're on the West Coast, we're on the east side of the Pacific Ocean, if you think about it that way. East side of the Pacific, you're standing in the middle. And you'll have to learn the common and scientific names for each species, and then at least 1 or 2 interesting facts about them. And those facts are going to be up to you. So whatever you find interesting, you'll be learning those. And those facts just have to be something substantial, not like something you could just see in the photo, like they're green, because it's green in the picture. That's not a no wow fact, that's a no duh fact. Okay. So why do we use scientific names? Why do I bother? Why don't we just learn the common names of things? It's much easier for some people. The main reasons are these. The common names are the ones that we use every day, and they're usually kind of superficially descriptive. Common names such as like butterfly or pink bellflower or cat or something like that. These names are kind of generic and basic, and they also vary depending on a part of the country that you're in, state, or region. So there's 3 different names for our purple sea star. It's called the ochre sea star. It's also called the rough starfish, and also the purple sea star. Depending on what book or publication you get, those names may change. And you may think you're talking about a different organism when you're actually talking about the exact same thing. So why do we use scientific names? Scientific names are universal They're used in every country in the world and in every field guide in the world, even if it's in a different language. The scientific name is there, and it's written in a language you can understand, right? It's not English, it's actually Latin, using that Latin alphabet, which we use as well, Greek alphabet, whatever. The first part of the name is the genus, and it's always capitalized. And many species belong to the same genus, and so if you know the genus name, you can recognize other species, and you may find other ones in different parts of the region, different parts of the world. And you may go, oh, that looks like a Laminaria. And, wow, it is a Laminaria. It's just a different species of. So it helps you with your identification in that. The second part of the name is the species name, and it's not capitalized. So the example here would be the purple sea star, Pisaster ocraceus, and its genus name is Pisaster. There's other Pisasters in the world. There's other ones in our area as well. And then ocraceus tells us specifically which one of those it is. And the classification system that we use is the one that has been around since classification was developed in the 1700s, right? It starts with domain, then it goes to kingdom, phylum, which we're going to talk about the phylum notes in a minute. So that's another group that they belong to, class, order, family, and then lastly, genus and species. And everything gets a genus and species name, and everything, of course, belongs to, some level within that whole arrangement. Okay, so the first group that we're going to talk about are the seaweeds or the kelps. And let's jump into some phylum notes on them. So seaweeds, what are seaweeds? The term seaweed refers to marine algae, and marine algae belong to three distinct groups. There are three groups of algae in the world, and what they all share in common is that they're multicellular, so they're bigger than a single cell, right? Single cell plant-like things exist in the ocean. Those are phytoplankton. We're going to talk about those in the lecture part this week. But these are multicellular. They're big. They're made of more than one cell, so you can see them. You can pick them up. And they're plant-like organisms. They're not actually technically plants. They do not produce seeds or flowers. They don't have roots. They don't have a vascular system. They have a different structure altogether. So they do photosynthesis, they're multicellular, but they're not technically plants. And how algae operate is they attach to the surface by a root-like structure. It's not roots, it's called a holdfast. It's just a cementing structure. It doesn't go into the substrate. It doesn't pull up nutrients. It doesn't do a lot of things that roots do. It's an attaching surface. And they can grow up to 30 or 40 meters long, which is over 100 feet, which is pretty amazing. In the tropics, you can find them down to depths of 600 feet, which is really incredible to think about. Light can reach that far. In our area, light tends to not reach that far down. There's more plankton in our ocean than there is in the tropics. It's more productive. So that makes the water cloudier, and that sucks up light. So light doesn't just penetrate as deep into the ocean because it gets absorbed near the upper surface. But algae here, again, you can find them down to 30, 40 meters deep, over 100 feet deep growing. They're hugely important to many species. They play a major role in the ecosystem. They generate what's called like kelp forests, and these are important, critical habitat for many, many, many species, fish, and many invertebrates as well. Find home and refuge, and parts of their life cycles are dependent on these kelp forests. And large species we often refer to as kelp. And there are some marine plants. These are called seagrasses. These are not seaweeds because they are actual plants with roots and a vascular system. And there's about 60 species globally. We have 2 here, and we will learn one today. We have surfgrass and we have eelgrass. They're closely related species. These are actual plants that grow in the water, and they're a very important food source for many marine organisms. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so the 2 or 3 groups of marine algae. First group is the brown algae. I'm not going to have you learn their scientific name here for that group, but Phaeophyta would be the name. Anyway, there's about 1,500 species in the world, and about 99.7% of those are marine. So 99.7% of all brown algae occur in the ocean. Just a small number of species occur in fresh water. They produce these alginate compounds in their cell walls that makes them flexible at cold temperatures, so they're kind of jelly-like. And these alginates are used by us humans in a lot of different things, in cosmetics, in industrial gels, in toothpaste, things like that as well, and in the food industry as kind of a thickener. It's used in salad dressings and other things like that. A lot of vegetarian and vegan sort of alternatives use these alginates as well as thickening things instead of things like pectin. Okay. So those are the brown algae. The red algae, Rhodophyta, about 4,000 species. So there's a lot more of those. About 98% are marine. And they produce agar and carrageenan, which is another kind of alginate style compound, flexible, jelly-like. And you can feel it when you pick up seaweeds and kelps. They're slimy, and especially if they've been left out in the sun and they start to decompose. All of the alginate slips out of the cell walls and makes this real mucus. You can pick some up and huck them at your friends, and it's gross. So these are also used in industry. I think, let me see what this picture links to here. So check it out. They're farmed in the tropics, which is really, really cool. The first time I saw this was in Indonesia, and I was with some friends, and we had hiked up to a hill similar to like where this photo is taken here. And I'd never seen this before. We looked out over the shallow reef area in this bay, and it looked just like this, like little square fields, like farm fields. And it was really crazy. It was mind-blowing. I didn't know what they were doing. And when the tide goes out, the people actually go out there and they run strings and little wooden dowels, and they tie the algae to it and to kind of promote their growth, and they farm them. Families have these plots, and then they gather them up in baskets. Sometimes they'll wait for the tide to, they'll load up the boats when the tide is out, and they're sitting there, and then when the tide comes in, they'll paddle the boats into shore, where they then, like this lady carrying this on her head here, they then dry them and sell them to big companies around the world and corporations. These people really work for nothing. I think I was talking to someone in the area where I was in Indonesia, and they made under $300 a year for this. So these people are living off of, nothing. Really, $30 a month or something like that is what they get for their labor, which is kind of crazy. It's crazy how cheap things are. Okay. Those are the browns and the red algae. They are most of the seaweeds that we encounter. Most of the things on our list fall into one of those two groups. And green algae are, there's 7,000 species worldwide, so they outnumber both the red and the brown combined, but only 13% are marine. So most green algae are in freshwater. You'll find them in rivers and lakes. They're the green kind of mossy stuff that grows on rocks. We have a couple different ocean varieties, but again, mostly in freshwater. And because they've moved into freshwater around the world, they've speciated into many different species due to divergent evolution. And they're the closest relative to modern plants. Modern plants evolved from the green algae group. They share characteristics a lot with them, including like some biochemical stuff, but also if you think like mosses and ferns use spores to reproduce, and so do green algae. They have to grow in wet areas, so you can kind of see the chain of events there. And then flowering plants, like the seagrass, that group of organisms, flowering plants, there's 250,000 species, in the world. They're almost all on land, right? Just a small fraction are in the ocean, 0.018. Kind of cool stuff. So those are our three groups of seaweeds, plus our one little group of flowering plants, our seagrass in that case. Okay, so here's our species for the week. We have 6 of them, and we'll start off with a green algae, actually, our one green algae on the list. It's called sea lettuce. It is edible. This is what is used to make nori rolls, or different species of this is. But this belongs to a genus called Ulva. So you can say that with me, Ulva. And I write SPA here, SPP, because there's 11 different species in the Pacific Northwest, and you can't tell them apart by having them in your hand. So instead of giving you a species, I'm giving you a genus, because it's part of a larger group. The only way to tell the 11 apart is using like molecular DNA stuff. But you'll see this in rocks and tide pools. It'll grow oftentimes in the tops of rocks. When the tide goes out, you'll see this kind of covering them. And it's edible. You need to rinse it, you need to dry it, and you make little snacks out of it. Ulva spa. Okay, next one up on our list is a really pretty one called feather boa kelp. And this one here grows up to 10 meters long, so these leaves can get really long, 30 feet. And they're not called leaves because they're not a plant, so we call them thalluses. That's kelp language for kelp leaf. And these are fringed, so they have little, tiny little photosynthetic phalluses and then little gassy balls that kind of alternate up and down along the side of them. All of the names that I have here in blue, and if anything down here is in blue, is hyperlinked. And so go through the species list and check out the links. Get familiar with the photos. But you can see the little gassy balls here that they produce. These fill up with air, carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide, and it allows the algae to float, right? So when the water's up, it kind of helps them raise up to get towards the light and do photosynthesis. This is a good image of it here. So there you go. They got a bunch of these little tiny ones that run up and down them. Okay, this is an important habitat organism as well, because these grow in these kind of dense swaths, and so many different things live underneath, right? For shelter, fish and things like that will hide underneath them, get out of the way of birds and out of the view, and all kinds of tiny other little organisms will anchor to them. And the scientific name for this one is Egregia menziesii. So repeat after me, Egregia menziesii. All right. Egregia refers to the feather boa kind of thing. It's kind of egregious and showy, like my unicorn. And menziesii is named after Archibald Menzies, who was a famous botanist back in the day when people were named Archibald. Okay, two more on the list here. Rack kelp and then bull kelp. We'll start with rack kelp. So rack kelp, it produces these big, wide leaves that are only a couple meters long, but they can get really wide. Look at this. So 6 feet long, but I mean, 3 to 4 feet wide in places, these huge leaves, and it forms these dense thickets. Just look at some of these beds of kelp in here when the tide goes out. When the tide is in, these big leaves kind of, wave in the currents. And they have just a little tiny stipe down in here, which is similar to a stem, and then they're holdfast where they anchor to the rock substrate that they latch onto. Here's a person laying next to a big blade of this stuff on a boat. Kind of cool marine biologist humor. The scientific name for this one is Laminaria bongardiana. Yep. So let's say this one together. Laminaria bongardiana. All right. So laminaria, laminar means flat, like laminate flooring, or to laminate something kind of flat and smooth, like their blades are. And bongardiana, I don't really know what that means, but it's kind of a cool name. Be a good name for like a kind of down-tuned heavy metal band, Bongarden. It's the unicorn talking. Okay, next up on our list would be bull kelp. This is the one that we're all familiar with. If you live here on the Oregon coast, you go out walking around, you find this stuff washed up on the beach, and it grows really big. This stuff can grow, as you can see in this picture here, can grow 30 meters in a single year. That's 90 feet in 1 year, from bottom to top. It's one of the fastest growing organisms on planet Earth. Cool fact about it. Forms these insane kelp forests, which are super important habitat all the way from California through Alaska, all the way through the Aleutians, kelp along the coast of Canada. Kelp forest habitats are crucial for many, many, many fish species, including like 30 different species of rockfish that we have here inhabit these things. All kinds of perch and lingcod, linger around the bottom of these things. So yeah, this one here has a big floaty gassy ball on top that helps to elevate it, and then these thalluses or kelp leaves that grow kind of spread out from the top of that do the photosynthesis, kind of feeding this thing. And its Latin name is a cool one. Let's go. Nereo Cistus lutekiana. All right. Nereo, referring to the god Nero of the underwater world, and Cistus, meaning like a cyst or like a bladder. So this is like Nero's bladder because it's this big, empty, kind of gassy ball. You can pop these things. Native Americans would actually slice the top off this, and it runs hollow for quite a ways through the tube, and they would fill them with oil, like fish oil. They would cook the fish oil down, and then they would pour it in here, and then put the lid back on, basically the cap back on, and use it to store the oil. It was kind of like a storage container. Pretty smart, pretty cool. Similar to what you do with bacon grease in a jar if you want to keep it around and use it later. So, a cool one there. Lutkiana, I don't know what that refers to. It sounds kind of Swedish to me. Cool beans. And these are edible as well. The thallus on these can be dried. You want to get them fresh. You don't want to get some slimy stuff off the beach. Get it fresh, and then you can rinse it, and then you can dry it. I ate a lot of this stuff when I worked in Alaska because we had a lot of time on our hands. We had a lot of this stuff around us everywhere, and it was fresh and growing, and most of the stuff we had was in cans. So we did a lot of wild harvesting. I find this stuff really tasty, but I have developed a taste for it. So there you go. Okay, our last two. We're zipping through this stuff today. Okay, rockweed. Probably the most common one that everybody encounters. The tide goes out, this stuff is just covering the rocks everywhere. And the leaves aren't super huge, right? It's like this big, right? It's just a little tiny leaf thallusy, branchy thing. Reminds me of like deer antlers, the way that they kind of fork out. And I've even seen this growing in the bay, in Tillamook Bay, near the mouth of the bay, you know, where the ocean influence, saltiness comes in a bit more. But it's a really cool one that makes good, important habitat on the rocks because when the tide goes out, the sun comes out, it heats up, and a lot of organisms crawl in and underneath this stuff and hide there. So if you start digging through this, you'll find cool things like isopods or even sea slugs, crabs, all kinds of snails and stuff. All kinds of invertebrates make this their home. The scientific name for this one, pretty easy one, Fucus gardneri. Fucus gardneri. So the fucus, not sure what that refers to, but the gardneri in the sense that it grows in these little gardens on top of these rocks. So that's kind of the way I think about it. Okay, so those have been our algae. We still got one more here, so let's just go back. We've got a green algae and ulva, and then we've got the rest are actually, I believe, brown algae all the way across the board. The Egregia might be a red, but I think it's a brown. And you don't need to know that. I'm just thinking out loud here. And the Laminaria and the bull kelp also, you're getting some of your larger algae species and brown algae. And Fucus gardneri, one of the smaller brown algae. And then now we're going to jump into an actual seagrass, right? So this is not a seaweed. And this is eelgrass. This grows in our bays and estuaries and forms a really important habitat. These eelgrass beds are crucial for many, many organisms that live in our bays and estuaries. And there's a whole ton of organisms that have a juvenile or larval stage inside our bays and estuaries. A lot of our major fish species do as well. A lot of our clams and bivalves have a larval stage before they actually become a clam and burrow in. And they live in the eelgrass beds. They'll attach to these blades. And if you take these blades and really look at them under a microscope, here's a sea cucumber, which is a little animal. A echinoderm wandering around in there. If you look at one of these blades under a microscope, you can see all kinds of cool little things attached to it, actually. And when I'm diving, I'll often kind of just walk through these with my hands as I'm floating above them and kind of peel around and look for things because there's all kinds of things hiding in there. Eelgrass beds have been ripped up and really heavily damaged historically through dredging. People try to open up bays and estuaries so that boats can move in and out more easily for shipping and industry, and they send in these dredges and just dig out the eelgrass beds. And this ends up having a really negative effect on the whole bay ecosystem itself, but also like things like fisheries and clams and other things. We have such great clam beds and fisheries here and things like that because we don't dredge our bays. Either Netar's Bay or Tillamook Bay are non-dredged bays, and you can see they're super healthy bays because during salmon season, just look at how many boats are out there in the water. Look at our clamming and other industries that we have, the oysters and all the other things that we do here. In a large part, this is due to, at least in part, to our eelgrass beds being really healthy. There's also a bird species that relies on the eelgrass, and that is the black brant. Black brants are related to Canada geese. They're in the same genus, Branta, but this goose is Branta. Kind of a cool scientific name where you get the genus and the species doubling up. Canada goose is Branta canadensis. So they're a close relative. They look similar, but they're black instead of brown. They got a white stripe around the neck, and brants nest up in Alaska, Bristol Bay, and the Copper River Delta area, but they winter down here, and we'll see them in Tillamook Bay, and they feed almost exclusively on eelgrass. That's their main food source. So if you see brant, you know you have eelgrass. Kind of a cool connection there. And again, this is not an algae. This is a legit flowering plant. It has roots that go down into the ground, and then here's a drawing. And it grows rhizomatously, which means that basically like a stem-like structure, half root, half stem, goes just under the surface, and instead of growing down, kind of grows horizontally under the surface, produces roots from that, but then also new shoots from that. And a lot of plants we have do this. A lot of weedy plants do this. But things like strawberries, you can think of them, how they kind of hop along, do this as well. It's a great growth strategy, and it's what helps them make these big, huge beds and mats and kind of grow and support each other too. As far as root structure goes. Okay, and the scientific name for this one is Zostera marina, or marina. I don't really know how to pronounce that. Marina? I'm going to leave that up to you. But it is Zostera marina, or marina. Okay, so backing it up, let's go backwards here. Eelgrass, Zostera marina. Rockweed, Fucus gardneri. Bull kelp, Cistus lutkiana. Rat kelp, Laminaria bongardiana, feather boa kelp, Egregia minzii, and sea lettuce, Ulva spa. Those are your 6 this week. Once again, you're going to fill those out here or on a piece of paper, but include, just, put them in rows or however you want to do it. Include the common scientific name, a short description, and in that description you can have some cool wow facts that you learned from here or you read on my little write-ups there that I had, and then a drawing for each one. I want you to draw each one as best you can. I know everybody's not a great artist, but do your best. It helps with your identification, and it also is just kind of relaxing to draw. Why not? And when you're done with that, take a photo of that. It'll be here in Google Classroom, and you'll go and you'll upload your photo to the assignment. And that'll be this assignment for the week. We also then have the weekly questions and the other lecture notes and that side of things. Okay, everybody. Unicorn out.